The night David came into the world, there was no celebration, no ululation of women outside, no excited father pacing proudly, waiting to announce the arrival of his son. Instead, silence and whispers filled the small compound, as though shame had just stepped in through the door. Grace lay on the bamboo mat, exhausted but hopeful. She had labored for hours, clinging to her last strength just to push this child into the world. When the midwife lifted the baby into her arms, Grace's eyes widened. Her son's skin was pale, almost golden white, glowing faintly under the flickering kerosene lamp. His hair looked like threads of fire, his eyelashes nearly invisible. He was beautiful, delicate, fragile, but not in the way her village expected. Her heart whispered, "My baby." But the midwife gasped, "Chinika, Grace, this is not normal." Before she could respond, the door burst open. Emeka, her husband, stormed in. He had been drinking palm wine with his friends outside, waiting for good news. But when he saw the baby in his wife's arms, he staggered back as though he had seen a ghost. "What? What is this?" his voice thundered. Grace's hands trembled. "It's our son. Your son." Emeka's eyes burned with denial. He spat on the ground. "This cannot be my blood. Look at him. Which man gave you this spirit child? Grace, you have shamed me." Her lips quivered. "No, Emeka, he is yours. God made him this way." But Emeka would not hear it. He slapped the wall, shouting loud enough for neighbors to gather. "No son of mine will look like this. You have brought a curse into my house." From the doorway, voices of relatives rose in agreement. Old women shook their heads. An uncle hissed, "This is not ordinary. An albino? Never seen in our lineage. He will bring bad luck. Throw him away before it is too late." Grace clutched the baby tighter, tears streaming. "No, he is innocent. He is mine." But her mother-in-law stepped forward, her eyes cold. "Grace, you don't understand. A child like this is an abomination. People will laugh at us. They will say your womb is cursed. Let this child go before he destroys our family." Grace looked around, desperate for help, but every face carried the same verdict: rejection. Even her own mother, who had come to assist during childbirth, whispered faintly, "My daughter, maybe they are right. This child will only bring you sorrow." Grace shook her head violently. "No! God gave him to me. I will not throw him away." But her words fell like stones into a pit of silence. Emeka snatched his wrapper, his jaw tight with anger. "Grace, if you keep this thing, then you are on your own. From today, you are no wife of mine." And just like that, he walked out, leaving the cries of his newborn echoing behind him. For weeks, Grace tried to fight. She breastfed David in secret, ignoring the whispers of neighbors who spat when she passed. Some called him Ghost Child. Children ran when they saw him, pointing and laughing. The pressure grew heavier each day. Food became scarce. Relatives refused to help her. Emeka never returned. Her own family urged her to leave the child somewhere, to start afresh. One rainy night, overwhelmed by hunger, shame, and fear, Grace sat by the doorway holding David. He was sleeping peacefully, tiny fists clenched, unaware of the battle raging around him. She kissed his forehead and sobbed, "My son, forgive me. The world will never accept you, and I am too weak to fight it." By morning, David was found wrapped in an old cloth near the village stream, abandoned by the very woman who had once vowed to protect him. The villagers shook their heads. "It is better this way. Some children are not meant to live." But fate was not finished with David. Though rejected, unwanted, and tossed aside like nothing, Destiny had already written his name in a place no man could erase. This albino child abandoned at birth would one day become a legend. The first memory David carried in his heart was not of love, nor laughter, nor the warmth of a parent's embrace. It was of doors closing. After his mother abandoned him, relatives took turns passing him around like an unwanted burden. At first his grandmother kept him for a while, but soon she grew tired. "I am too old to raise a cursed child," she muttered, pushing him to an aunt. That aunt endured only a few months before complaining, "He eats too much, and his pale skin attracts mockery to my house." Then she dropped him at another uncle's compound. And so by the time David was 5, he had already lived in 4 different homes, none of which he could call his own. Every new roof came with the same message: "You are not wanted." Children his age had parents picking them from school, hugging them, giving them snacks. David had no such luxury. He would wait outside with his torn sandals, watching other children run into their mother's arms. Sometimes he would clutch the strap of his bag tighter, forcing himself not to cry. The name stung worse than hunger. "Ghost," they shouted. "Spirit child. See his hair. Maybe he came from the white man's land. Don't touch him, or you will be cursed." They laughed, pointed, and sometimes threw stones. One boy smeared charcoal on David's skin, shouting, "Let's see if we can paint him black like us." The other children roared with laughter, but David stood still, fighting back tears. He learned quickly that crying gave bullies more power. At night, he often lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering why God had made him different. He would rub his pale skin until it turned red, whispering, "Maybe if I scrub hard enough, the color will change." But of course, it never did. Still, within that pain, a strange fire was kindling. David began to realize something important. Love, the kind that came easily for others, would not come freely for him. If he was ever going to be seen, valued, or respected, he would have to earn it. School became both his battlefield and his refuge. From his very first day, the stigma began. The headmaster paused when he saw him standing in line with other children. His pale skin glistened under the sun, his hair so light it almost looked golden. The man frowned. "Whose child is this?" he asked suspiciously. No one answered. The aunt who had brought David to school pretended to adjust her wrapper, avoiding the question. The headmaster sighed, shaking his head as though David were an inconvenience. "Go sit at the back. Don't disturb the other children." And that was how his seat was always chosen for him, at the back, near the window, as though his very presence was a distraction. Teachers rarely called on him to answer questions. When they did, it was often with doubt. "You the one at the back, do you even understand what we're teaching?" But David did understand. In fact, he understood faster than most. He listened closely, memorized everything, and when he read, he absorbed knowledge like dry soil drinking rain. Still, knowledge did not shield him from cruelty. His classmates tore his notebooks when the teachers weren't looking. "Ghost boy doesn't need to study," they mocked. "Spirits already know everything." Some spat on his desk, others threw chalk at his head. Once during break, a group of boys cornered him. "Say I am a ghost, or we will beat you." David clenched his fists and refused. They shoved him into the sand, ripped the cover of his only textbook, and ran off laughing. He picked up the pieces silently, dusted the sand from his uniform, and went back to class. His heart ached, but his resolve grew stronger. They could tear his books, but not his mind. While others mocked him, he immersed himself in books. He borrowed torn textbooks from older children, memorized poems, and read aloud when no one was listening. Soon he began to outshine even the brightest in class. One day during a mathematics competition, David solved a problem so fast that the teacher stared at him in disbelief. "You? Are you sure someone didn't give you the answer?" the teacher asked suspiciously. David looked him in the eyes and said, "Sir, I may not look like the others, but my brain works too." That was the first time anyone had clapped for him. A small clap, hesitant, but it was enough to plant courage in his heart. Whenever the teacher asked for reading exercises, David's voice carried a rhythm that silenced the room. He read with clarity, emotion, and confidence, as though he was living inside the stories. Even the same classmates who mocked him could not help but listen when he read. And then came the day of the storytelling competition. The teacher had asked each child to stand and narrate a short folktale. Most children repeated the same stories their parents had told them. But when it was David's turn, something shifted in the air. He rose slowly, clutching his torn exercise book. The class snickered, expecting him to stammer. But instead, his voice rang out clear. Once in a small village, there was a boy everyone rejected. They said he was cursed. But the boy discovered something the others could not see, that inside him was a light the world could not extinguish. He wasn't just telling a story. He was telling his story. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Even the teacher stared at him in surprise. Then, slowly, a few hands clapped. For the first time, David felt something he had never known in school. Respect. But respect is fragile, and envy is quick to rise. The following week, some boys mocked him even more. "Ah, Ghost Child is now a storyteller, oh. Maybe he will go and tell spirits about us." They tore his essay and threw it into the gutter. David picked the soggy pages and pressed them against his chest. Tears burned in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Deep inside, he told himself, "If my words can silence a room, then one day they will silence the whole world." That day, a flame was lit. David realized that his skin might make him a target, but his mind, his sharpness, his ability to read, to write, to tell stories was his weapon. No one could take that away. And so while others saw school as a burden, David saw it as his battlefield of transformation. He read late into the night, borrowed books no one cared about, scribbled essays, and practiced telling stories to the moon. The same world that laughed at him was unknowingly training him. Every insult was sharpening his resolve. Every rejection was toughening his spirit. He was still stigmatized, still treated like he didn't belong. But slowly, quietly, David was discovering the very thing that would one day make him unforgettable. He was finding his voice. Yet for every small victory, there was a wound. Relatives continued to reject him. Sometimes they starved him intentionally, saying, "If you were truly normal, you would fetch your own food from the spirits that sent you." He worked odd chores to survive, farming, fetching water, hawking. On his 8th birthday, no one remembered. He sat alone behind the compound, tracing numbers in the sand with a stick. Children nearby were celebrating another boy's birthday with balloons and music. David whispered to himself, "Happy birthday, David," then smiled faintly, because if no one would celebrate him, he would celebrate himself. It was in those quiet, lonely moments that a dream began to grow inside him. He told himself, "One day they will know my name. One day I will not be the boy they pass around. I will not be the ghost they laugh at. I will be someone." The world had thrown rejection at him like stones, but David was slowly learning to turn those stones into stepping blocks. He did not know it yet, but every insult, every abandonment, every night of hunger was chiseling him into the kind of man who could not be broken. And though he was still the child nobody wanted, destiny was already waiting patiently, preparing to crown him the man everyone would need. By the time David reached his teenage years, the weight of rejection had settled deep in his bones. He had survived childhood mockery, torn books, and cruel laughter. But now the whispers cut sharper. Who will ever marry someone like that? See how the sun burns his skin. He is half dead already. If he doesn't die young, maybe he will go mad. Every insult chipped at him. Every whisper followed him like a shadow. He avoided looking in mirrors because all he saw was a stranger staring back at him, pale skin that never tanned like the others, hair that glowed against the crowd, eyes that squinted under the sun. In a world where blending in was safety, he stood out like a wound. Loneliness became his only friend. He often sat by himself during break, watching other boys play football. Sometimes he wanted to join, but the moment he stepped closer, someone would hiss, "Go away, ghost boy. If you touch the ball, we won't play again." So he learned to watch from afar, his hands tucked into his pockets, his dreams locked inside. At night, when relatives had fallen asleep, David would lie awake staring at the ceiling, thoughts dark as the night crept into his mind. Maybe they are right. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe the world would be better if I just disappeared. He considered it more than once, running away, ending it all, silencing the pain forever. But destiny is stubborn. It always sends a whisper of hope, even in the loudest storm of despair. That whisper came in the form of Mr. Johnson, his English teacher. Unlike others, Mr. Johnson never flinched when looking at David. He noticed something different, not in his skin, but in his eyes, the way they lit up when he read, the way his hands scribbled notes furiously during class. One day after school, he found David sitting alone under a mango tree, staring blankly into space. His exercise book lay open beside him, the pages untouched. "David," Mr. Johnson called gently. The boy looked up slowly, expecting another scolding. But the teacher only sat beside him, dusting his trousers. "Why do you always sit alone?" David shrugged. "Because no one wants me around." Silence lingered. A bird chirped in the distance. Then Mr. Johnson leaned forward, his voice firm but kind. "Listen to me, David. I know they laugh at you. I know they call you names. But let me tell you something they don't know." David's eyes lifted, curious. "Your difference is your power, not your weakness." The words sank into his chest like a spark of fire. "You see this skin they mock? It is the very thing that will make you unforgettable. You see this mind of yours, the way you read and write? That is your weapon. One day, the same mouths that call you ghost will call you sir." For the first time in a long while, David felt tears in his eyes, not from pain, but from hope. "Do you really believe that, sir?" he asked, his voice trembling. Mr. Johnson smiled. "I don't just believe it, I know it. But you must also believe it for yourself. The world may never give you love freely, David. But if you hold on, if you sharpen your gift, the world will have no choice but to listen." That night, David could not sleep. He replayed those words over and over again. Your difference is your power, not your weakness. For the first time, he looked at his pale skin under the lantern light and saw not a curse, but a mark. Something unique, something rare. It didn't erase the pain of the past, but it gave him a reason to keep going. Phew. The next morning, when his classmates mocked him again, he did not bow his head. He walked past them with his books clutched tight, whispering to himself, "My difference is my power." And though the road ahead was still dark, a small flame had been lit inside him, a seed of hope that would one day grow into the tree of his destiny. The night in Enugu was never truly dark. Neon lights blinked from roadside shops, headlights rushed past, and the dim orange glow of faulty street lamps flickered like dying candles. For David, those weak bulbs became his university. By day, he was a hustler, a boy with no address, no family, and no one to call his own. He patched torn shoes in Ogbede Market, balanced heavy loads on his thin shoulders in the market, and hawked sachet water in the scorching sun. His pale skin burned easily, his eyes strained under the harsh daylight. But still he pushed himself. Hunger did not wait for pity. But by night, when the city quieted, David transformed. He would sit under a broken streetlight, spread out borrowed textbooks, and read with a determination that defied the rejection written into his life story. He could barely afford notebooks, so he wrote his lessons on scraps of nylon bags, empty cartons, and sometimes on the ground with sticks. Children his age mocked him in the daytime. Ghost boy, spirit pickin', cursed one. They laughed at his skin, his sunburns, and his squinting eyes. Yet in the shadows of the night, while they slept in comfort, David studied. One evening, after finishing his hawking, he found a tattered copy of Things Fall Apart lying near a refuse dump. He dusted it off, hugged it like treasure, and devoured its pages under his streetlight. Achebe's words became fuel, whispering that even a boy the world rejected could shape destiny with his mind. The streets became his classroom. The traders, bus conductors, and hustlers became his classmates. His teachers were books that had been thrown away by others. And slowly knowledge began to build a fire in him. Each passing night, David whispered to himself, "They called me a curse, but I will become a blessing. They abandoned me, but the world will not ignore me." The boy who once lived in shadows was beginning to prepare for a future that would one day shine so bright, even his enemies would bow to it. David's life was still rough, but something inside him had begun to burn brighter than the insults, brighter than the nights of hunger. He had discovered something many people twice his age had not: his voice. One evening, after a long day of hustling, David borrowed a small Nokia phone from a friend who sold recharge cards by the roadside. The phone had cracks all over the screen, the buttons were stiff, but to David, it was a golden key. He typed slowly, his thumbs aching, but his heart poured out like fire. He wrote about his life. "They called me a ghost, but I am flesh and blood. They said I was cursed, but I refused to live like one. If God gave me this skin, then it must be for a reason. I will not let shame bury me. I will rise." The recharge card seller helped him post it on Facebook. By the next morning, dozens of people had shared it. Some mocked him still, but many wrote back with encouragement. "Wow, this boy writes with so much wisdom." "Who is this David?" His words cut deep. "Keep going, young man. You're inspiring us." For the first time, strangers began to see David not as the albino boy, but as a voice of strength. Night after night, he would sneak to the roadside, borrow the cracked phone, and write. He told stories of rejection, of hunger, of fighting to survive. He wrote about the pain of being different, but also the power in embracing it. Soon a teacher stumbled on his posts and shared them with her students, calling him a young Nigerian thinker. Local pastors quoted him in sermons. Some of his words even appeared in WhatsApp statuses of people he had never met. David's chest swelled with a new kind of pride, not the pride of wealth or looks, but the pride of impact. He began to believe that maybe Mr. Johnson was right. Maybe his difference was not a weakness, but a spark that could ignite flames far greater than he could imagine. David, the boy once abandoned, was becoming something new, an emerging voice of destiny. For the first time in his life, David felt like the universe had finally remembered him. After years of rejection, bullying, and nights of reading under the cold glare of streetlights, his name was suddenly called by destiny. One sunny afternoon, while selling egg rolls at a bus park in Enugu, a group of people approached him. They weren't like the usual passers-by who sneered or mocked him. They carried clipboards, wore branded t-shirts, and their voices were warm. "Are you David?" one of them asked, bending down to meet his eyes. "Yes," David replied shyly, clutching his tray. They explained they were from an NGO that supported underprivileged children, and one of his teachers, Mr. Johnson, had recommended him. They had seen his results, his essays, and heard of how he read at night under streetlights. They wanted to offer him a scholarship. David's knees almost buckled. A scholarship? Him? The boy people called Ghost? The boy his parents had abandoned? For the first time, he felt seen. But before he could even process the miracle, news spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the same relatives who once called him a curse began appearing at his doorstep. Aunties, uncles, even cousins he had never spoken to. They arrived with fake smiles and empty words. "David, my son!" one of them cried, hugging him tightly. "We have always loved you. You know you are family." Another relative chimed in. "If not for poverty, we would have trained you. But thank God help has finally come." They began to fight among themselves about who would take David in, who would manage his scholarship money, and who was his true guardian. David sat there numb, watching the same people who once shut their doors in his face now scramble to claim him. He remembered nights when he knocked on their gates begging for food and was chased away like a stray dog. He remembered Christmas mornings when he stood outside watching their children eat rice while he starved. And now, because of opportunity, they wanted him. The betrayal cut deeper than rejection. It wasn't that they hated him anymore. It was that they wanted to use him. He realized something powerful that day. People don't always come back because they love you. Sometimes they come back because of what they can take from you. That night, as he lay on his ragged bed, he whispered to himself, "I will never forget how they treated me when I had nothing. I will build my future, but I won't let them break me again. From today, I will trust actions, not words." It was the night David learned to guard his heart, and it was the night he vowed that no betrayal would ever stop him from reaching the destiny that awaited him. When David was first invited to speak at a local school, he thought it was a joke. The same community where children once chased him with sticks, shouting, "Oyinbo Pepper" and "Ghost Boy," now wanted him to stand before them as a guest. He almost declined, fearing they only wanted to humiliate him again. But something deep inside whispered, "This is your chance." On the day of the event, David wore the only clean shirt he had. His heart pounded as he stood at the edge of the classroom. The students giggled when he entered the same giggle he had heard all his life. His throat tightened, his palms sweated. For a moment he considered running out. But then he remembered Mr. Johnson's words. "Your difference is your power, not your weakness." He inhaled deeply and began to speak. "Some of you laugh at me because of my skin. You call me Ghost. You think I am cursed. But let me tell you something. The sun may burn me, but it cannot burn my dreams." The class went silent. For the first time, those who mocked him were not laughing. They were listening. His voice grew stronger as he shared his story, the nights of hunger, the street lights that became his classroom, the pain of rejection, and the power of refusing to give up. By the time he finished, the same children who once called him names were clapping. Some even stood on their feet. That day, David realized something profound. The world only laughs until you give them a reason to applaud. From then on, invitations began to pour in. Churches, schools, and youth groups wanted to hear the albino boy who spoke with fire. He now gets the merit he deserves. though spotlight can be heavier than chains. David had once begged for food on the streets, but now journalists begged for his words. Television stations invited him to share his journey. On live shows, he sat in crisp suit shirt, speaking to millions who watched with admiration. Cameras flashed, applause roared, strangers called him inspiration. But behind the applause, a shadow followed him. The same family members who once abandoned him, the uncles who said he would bring shame, the cousins who mocked his skin, now lined up at his door. Suddenly they spoke of him with pride. "That's our blood," they boasted. "We always knew David would make it." Even his father, who once denied him, appeared in public pretending to be his strongest supporter. The bitterness David felt was sharp. Memories of rejection and hunger clashed with the smiles of those who now sought to claim him. He wanted to shut the door in their faces, to remind them of the nights he slept hungry while they looked away. But each time the anger swelled, his heart whispered another voice. "Forgive, David. Forgiveness is heavier than success, but it frees you." He struggled. At night he lay awake, torn between the pain of yesterday and the grace of tomorrow. He asked himself, "If I hold on to bitterness, am I any different from those who once despised me? But if I forgive too easily, do I not cheapen the pain I endured?" This was the weight of success, not the wealth, not the fame, but the burden of choosing between resentment and forgiveness. And the nation watched, wondering, would David's heart remain pure, or would bitterness poison the man who had risen from dust? The meeting was long overdue. David stood at the threshold of the small, crumbling house where his parents now lived, the same house where he once cried as a boy, waiting for a love that never came. Cameras were not here. No journalists, no applause, only silence and the ghost of memories. When his parents saw him, their eyes widened. His father, frail and bent with age, trembled. His mother broke down in tears before she could speak. "David," her voice cracked, we never stopped thinking of you." Bitterness rose in David's chest. "Never stopped thinking of me," the memories answered. The whispers of neighbors calling him a curse. The way his father had walked out the day his skin burned white under the sun. The years of loneliness that hardened him. He almost turned to leave, but his father's broken voice stopped him. "We abandoned you out of shame," the old man confessed, his eyes wet with regret. "We feared what people would say. We thought abandoning you would protect us from ridicule, but it destroyed us instead. We wronged you, son. We wronged you deeply." The words pierced deeper than a blade. David's fists clenched at his sides, his heart raging with decades of unanswered pain. Revenge whispered sweetly in his ear, "Let them feel what you felt. Let them taste rejection now that you have power." But as his mother reached for his hands, sobbing, David's tears finally fell. Not for them, no, for the boy he once was, who had longed for this moment of acknowledgement. His voice broke as he spoke. "I don't forgive you because you deserve it. I forgive you because I deserve peace." The room fell silent. His parents wept bitterly, falling to their knees. David did not lift them. He wasn't ready for embraces, but the chains around his heart cracked and began to fall away. Forgiveness was not weakness. It was a release. As he walked out of that house, he whispered to himself, "I am free." And for the first time, the weight of revenge lost its grip. David's name was no longer whispered with pity. It was now shouted with pride. From the dusty streets of Enugu, where he once begged for acceptance, he now stood on international stages, commanding applause from thousands. He built the David Foundation for albino rights, funding scholarships for children who looked like him. Children's Society once called mistakes. He launched campaigns across Nigeria spreading the message, "Your difference is your power." Global organizations invited him to speak. In London, he stood before a packed auditorium. In New York, his voice echoed through the United Nations. His words were no longer about his pain alone. They became a beacon for the oppressed, the marginalized, the abandoned. The boy once bullied for his pale skin was now the face of resilience. Even his parents came, older and weaker, sitting quietly in the crowd one evening as David addressed the stadium. Tears streamed down their faces. They had abandoned him out of shame, but now the world celebrated the very thing they had despised. David, with tears glistening in his own eyes, ended that speech with the words that defined his entire journey. They tried to sacrifice my future by abandoning me. But today I am a legend because rejection could not kill destiny. The crowd roared, cameras flashed, the world rose to its feet. In that moment, David was no longer just a man, he was a movement.